Hello everyone. So hopefully another informative good video today, and the topic is going to be the deadlift in terms of how we train it, particularly how frequently we train, as well as sort of what you do in the training session to a degree, which obviously is going to affect it. I'm going to talk about how to a degree. It is the odd one out. It is the brown one in the blue pack, essentially. Right, so in terms of frequency, some people might say Connor's a moderate, maybe even a higher frequency guy. Look, I'm a frequency guy. My thoughts on frequency is this: once you're recovered, do it again because that's going to give you the best overload. My thoughts on frequency is do the amount that gives you the best overload. Pretty simple. Now, where that sort of ties in practically, as well as like in research, etc., does seem to look like more of a high frequency approach as in terms of what others may perceive it as, maybe more of a moderate frequency in terms of what powerlifters etc might look at. Right, but again with the deadlift, how I believe you should train it is you should train it when it is good to go again. Keep in mind systemic things. But that number seems to be a little bit different. It doesn't seem to be 3 times a week frequency is the best. I'd argue that that number, in terms of, look, the stronger you are in terms of anything, the less frequently you can train stuff because you're creating more overload as a whole. It's going to take more time to recover from the sort of stimulus you've just given. So let's say for most, a beginner in biceps, it could be like, okay, 5 times a week is high frequency, moderate 3, bloody low is 1. Looking at deadlift, even moderate, like intermediate, I'd still argue that, training 1 time every 5 days is pretty high-ish frequency. Once a week is like moderate, and once every 10 days, 2 weeks is more towards low, even though I don't think it works that badly, to be honest. Right, so we've already established my thoughts on overload. I believe it's very important, and I think you should adjust accordingly. Now, in terms of like how you split things up, and with frequency, I do talk about overload, but there's also what's very tied to it is undulation. As certain things recover in terms of systemically or maybe even peripherally, other things that are already recovered can benefit from some things. There's a lot of value as you're trying to up the frequency of certain things to doing a harder and lighter session, a force and a technique session, a high rep, low rep to a degree. Deadlifts, and I'm going to tie this again a little more towards powerlifting now. Look, you doing a 60% of 1 RM deadlift versus 100% of 1 RM deadlift is going to have a different effect versus, I believe, a bench press and squat at the same intensities. I believe the technique in a 60% of 1 RM squat as well as a bench press looks decently similar to a 1 RM of those lifts. Now, the technique for a 60% deadlift, I believe, looks pretty different to what a 100% of, a 1 RM deadlift looks like. Sick of saying those numbers. I don't believe the carryover as well from practicing technique or blah, blah, blah at lower percentages even transfers that well, not really at all, to a massive degree, unless you're really, really, really beginner based, towards the really 1 RM stuff. I think there's certain biomechanical adjustments your body will do in terms of changing levers so you can get through the lift that don't occur at 60%, yet do in a squat and bench press. It's a lot less muscle, it's a lot more adjustment of leverages than the other two. Yes, there's always considerations of both on either sides, but across the spectrum, it fits more towards the other side. So with that in mind, okay, it sort of, for me, takes out the value of those lighter sessions. I see it as, okay, how much is it going to give me versus how much is it going to fatigue me? I don't believe that trade-off is effective. I don't think it's worth it. I think it's going to affect not just the muscles involved in deadlift, but as well as things such as systemic recovery a lot more. The benefits of a 60% of 1 RM session are minimal in terms of technique. But okay, what about lower percentages for hypertrophy? And I think that's the next topic. I'm not a huge fan of deadlifts for hypertrophy. Look, what makes muscles grow the most is a big amount of tension in the muscle. Now, I'm not going to lie that obviously deadlifts on the whole, until you get really, really strong, allow you to lift most weight out of just about any exercise. So there should be a lot of tension going through the body. But the issue is, look, it is very across the board. It's very let's say, I don't know, you're deadlifting 200 kilos, might be 40, 40, 40, 40 everywhere. Yet the threshold for tension of an individual muscle per se might be 80, 80, 80 or something like that. It's like, okay, it's doing something, but it's not enough to really drive an adaptation there, even if you're doing it for higher reps, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's a very worthwhile point. I think there's better alternatives for deadlifts for hypertrophy. If you're trying to grow the hamstrings, maybe good morning / RDLs might work better. Other lower percentage, full range of motion, more specified things. Back, maybe you can do more snatch grip stuff. Maybe lower back, you can just do longer range of motion, maybe deficit stiff leg deadlift, which I do like, by the way. So there are things to consider there. That, okay, so lower percentages aren't really going to provide me with, I believe, much growth. Maybe a degree. Again, if you're new, novel to stimulus, there will be a little bit. But as you progress throughout your career, your deadlift isn't going to be a conventional deadlift. For most people's levers, isn't going to be your best bet for growing hamstrings, lower back to a big degree, upper back, glutes, quads, whatever. I think there's better things you can be doing there. And at the same time, when you're doing all that stuff, there is such thing as systemic fatigue. So how much you can recover from the whole is different to how much you can recover from as a sum of all those individual muscles. Sometimes the addition of all those individual muscles is less than you can handle systemically. So suddenly, you're doing the extra calf work is going to affect everything down the road. Now, you're doing a lot of fatiguing deadlifts is going to really affect the rest in terms of, now the calf workout isn't just effective there, but affects everything down the road. More overtraining syndromes, more fatigue, etc. jumps into a part of the equation. So I believe, with particularly powerlifting stuff, the high intensity, specificity and technique work, in my opinion, for deadlift is 85% plus. It's not those numbers for squats and bench press. That's when you start to get a degree of transfer. Honestly, 90% is where you get the best specificity. In terms of you always get the best specificity close towards your 1 rem, of course. Certain little things adjust for bench and squats, but not to the same drastic degree that a deadlift does. So yeah, because of that, less need for those lighter sessions, those technique sessions. You even see people that do, the DUP stuff, they don't seem to progress in the deadlift as much as the other lifts. Look, again, my thought process and thing is create the right stimulus and then you wait till you go again. I don't believe the lighter stuff, which ties into undulation, is the right stimulus for deadlifts, so I don't see the value there, especially how much fatigue it carries. At the same time, how long it can take for there, not just for certain peripheral muscles, but to a degree systemically, I'm not going to argue squats aren't systemically fatiguing as well, seems to be a long time. So with your deadlift stuff, maybe value towards training, once every 5 days as you get stronger. So as you progress throughout your training career, maybe once every 5 days, maybe you can do a little bit of technique work at the start, but as soon as you hit intermediate, it's do muscle specific lifts to a degree. So it's always going to be crossover. Pure isolation doesn't exist in compounds, but I'm not saying compounds don't make you grow. As long as there's a bias towards things, you will be okay. But at the same time, once you sort of ticked off that bucket, done the variations, moving closer to the competition, if it's a powerlifting meet, whatever, you're going to run out of benefits essentially with a high frequency approach. In fact, you're going to run into a lot of downsides, particularly the fatiguing side of things. So something to consider there. It is a little bit of the odd one out there in terms of powerlifting as well as probably bodybuilding as well. So yeah, something to consider, and I've dragged this out way too long, summarising the same points. Bye.